Hey everybody, welcome to my Capstone project presentation. I did my capstone project on the unique history and controversy that sometimes surrounds the presidential pardon in American government. I picked this topic mainly because I'm actually pretty, I don't want to say I'm pretty fluent in government. I've taken a lot of government classes and I understand the majority of government, but presidential pardon has never been something that's been explained to me or really talked about into the history and diving deep into what it really is. So I think where we should start with this is, what is a pardon? We can kind of loosely define a pardon because there really isn't a clear definition within the Constitution of what it really is. It ultimately is an executive power, given to only the president, and a pardon removes any of someone's former charges that have been used against them in a certain situation, but it's typically used to right social injustices within systems of unfair law in our own American government. We'll get to an example of it pretty quickly. It's listed right in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, where it talks about some executive powers. It talks about how the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, the ultimate head guy. But then at the ending of it, it says, he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. That was it. That's the whole pardon power, and that's all they talk about it in the Constitution. And it's very interesting because how loosely defined it was. What we see, or what we know about the Constitutional Convention, was that it wasn't originally in the Virginia Plan or the New Jersey Plan. It wasn't until Alexander Hamilton voiced his opinion on whether or not he believed it should be there, and he did believe it. The roots of the presidential pardon go all the way back to King Henry. I think King Henry goes all the way back to Great Britain. And a power that the king had, so multiple kings had. It wasn't just one king, but they had this ability to pardon, and it was pardoning people on crimes that they didn't feel were accurately judged upon or in another way. So that was how it got put into the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton was very vocal about it, and not the whole Constitutional Convention was on board with it, but they eventually agreed, and it became a executive power that has been ruled on by the Supreme Court only a few times. They really haven't stepped on or done anything to the presidential pardon. They want to leave that power in the hands of the president. One of the earliest uses, and I think it's honestly maybe the best use of the presidential pardon that I found in my research, during George Washington's presidency, there was a whiskey tax that was put forth by legislation. We know George Washington very rarely used a veto, and the whiskey tax was put in place by American legislation. The whiskey tax raised the taxes on selling whiskey a ton, which a lot of farmers were using with their grain, their extra grain, and turning it into whiskey and selling it that way. But the tax became too high for these small farmers to be able to pay, which made the big farmers really be able to dominate the market. Looking back, terrible law because everybody was taxed evenly, blah, blah, blah. It just doesn't work for the small guy as much as it does for the big guy. Anyways, the rebellion started from these small farmers, and a couple men were charged with treason. George Washington felt that it was unlawful, that they were charged with treason, and pardons them very quickly, dropping all charges against them and everything. What we learned 4 years later, Thomas Jefferson's presidency, is he goes in and right away repeals the whiskey tax. So what we see is this perfect example of a president going in early and saying, you know what, this law probably isn't right, but we don't have time to fix it. I'm going to pardon you, allow you to walk, and then we'll go from there. I think the pardon has massively changed through that time, and the pardon is now typically grouped in with other forms of clemency. Clemency are described as it's a form of mercy that we're showing to the people of social injustices. Commutations are usually grouped in with the pardon power. Commutation would be a reduction of sentence for people who have already been charged. Typically, the pardon happens before the charge. Not all the time, though. It can happen after as well. Anne McMillan talks about it in her article that I went through, and I found it interesting. I wanted to delve into the last two presidencies the last two full presidencies. I don't think it's fair to talk about what Joe Biden's done right now until he's out of the seat, out of the POTUS position. And the numbers are really unreal. So in the last 3 presidencies, it was the first time we'd ever seen over 11,000 people ask for pardons or a form of clemency, whether it be reduction of sentence or a true full-on pardon. Typically, a form of a commutation is much more likely, but they group them together because they're kind of the same. It's showing mercy altogether. But what we see is President Trump during his time granted 212 forms of clemency, whether it be commutations or pardons. President Obama, Barack Obama, in his 4 years in office in his 8 years in office, had 1,927 forms of clemency granted towards people. Now, this caused controversy on both sides, the left and the right. When Obama was doing it in the right, it was very similar, looking back in history to the George Washington situation with the Whiskey Rebellion. Obama was really focused on helping people who were in on like small drug charges, maybe just carrying marijuana, which is now legal in a lot of states. And he was reducing their sentences. Rarely did he fully pardon somebody. He was just granting them commutations so that they didn't have to stay in jail for quite so long. So it's similar to the George Washington, where it seems like he's just ahead of his time, thinking of like, okay, and this is probably not that big of a deal. But a lot of people had issues. It became President Barack Obama loves the druggies, the drug users, these are all these people, they should be off the streets anyways, blah, 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 and majority of them were on very small drug charges. And then Trump comes into office and only grants, in his 4 years, 212. That is not very many. However, the reason why is majority of the people he was granting clemency or giving clemency to were people he knew or were directly associated with him politically. This is incredibly interesting. So interesting, because we see both ends of the spectrum and how it can both be controversial. Here, Obama, everybody's like, well, he's doing it too much. This is too big of a deal, blah, blah, blah. But then Trump comes in with 212, and it's still a big deal because of who he's pardoning rather than how many. I think the presidential pardon is so interesting, and I really did enjoy researching it. My own opinion of presidential pardons is I really do think they're a good thing when used properly, right? Like a lot of good things, as long as you're not abusing the power. You could argue that certain times throughout history that we have abused our power. We've seen that Bill Clinton pardoned his own brother on drug charges, which just seems like the fact that there's no check for that, like he can just do that for his own family, seems very, very wrong. And honestly, it sounds like you're abusing your power. But I think the way it is in the Constitution, it works. I do think there's more guidelines that could be put in, but it's there for a good purpose, and I don't believe every president has the right purpose and intent behind what they're doing. I found this project extremely interesting to research. I actually enjoyed learning a lot about the presidential pardon and how it's come to be what it is today. The last thing I wanted to tell you guys was that majority of clemency you are requested, right? The whoever is in charge will request it, go to the pardons office that the president has. In the last 3 presidencies, we've seen over 10,000 requests for clemency. It had happened one time before that. And every presidency, there was only one other president with 10,000 total requests. And that is so interesting to see how much people are asking for forms of clemency. So interesting. Thank you guys. Have a nice day.